Hello and welcome to today's tutorial whereby we'll be deploying Keysight's CloudLens Manager into Azure. So let's get started. What we want to do first of all is to deploy an empty VM in which to install the manager. So in this case we're going to deploy in Ubuntu. Now other Linux packages are available and supported, but we'll start with Ubuntu and we'll go with version 18 here. To my knowledge, versions 20 and 22 are now supported, but 18 works fairly well. You can always upgrade later on. Now we'll configure the various details we want for this particular VM, so the region, the resource groups, and of course the name. Important to keep in mind that we'll keep the size of the image and the resources the same here. This is the default, and been told that this should be good for managing around 10,000 taps within CloudLens. So it will scale massively even to enterprise. The SSH public key here, make sure you select one that you already have and it's in a safe place because you'll need this to log in once you've deployed. Now the disks, the deployment guide mentions that we'll need a minimum of 100 gig. But of course the default is 32, but we can always partition this later on, and that's what we're going to do. So we'll move to the next step. Configure where or in which VM, which VNet you wish to deploy this particular VM. Now I have various VNets all separated, so select the correct one there, and various other options we wish to use. From here, select any appropriate options that you desire before we go towards the end and review. So once at this stage, we'll just review the various options that we've configured and selected. Once we're happy with that, we'll just go ahead and create this particular VM. This will take a few moments, but I'll speed up the process. Great. Now the deployment is complete. Well, the configuration of the VM, that is. So at this point, what we want to do is make sure that we configure the proper disk size. So in order to do that, we need to stop the VM, and then we can resize the disk. Okay, we can see that it stopped. Go towards disks, select the existing disk, size and performance, and then select a disk size equal to or greater than 100 gig. Now, erring on the side of caution, I think I'm just going to select 256. If there's a specific performance metrics you need to hit, then select that also. But I'll leave it as default for the time being. We've selected save. Okay, we've now updated the disk. Great. So then we can navigate back to the VM itself and start it. So that's great. We now have an empty VM in which to install the CloudLens Manager. So let's install the CloudLens Manager. So first of all, we'll need to connect via SSH to the VM that we've just created. Great. Once in, you'll need to download the installer package from the Keysight support portal and upload that to the VM. Now this could take a while because the VM was around 4 gig in size. In this particular case, I've done it in the background using WinSCP, whatever method you desire, but as long as you have a copy of that image there, or deployment file, that's all great. Modify the permissions so that we can execute it. And then we can execute the installer. We'll start the process. This process can take a while, up to really 30 minutes. So while that's going on, it's probably a good idea at some point to go through the connectivity and the network security side of things to ensure that you allow HTTPS from whichever locations that you need to then access the manager once it is finished installing. Here I've sped up the process, so we're now complete. Again, once you've reached this stage, it could still take another sort of 10 minutes or so for the reboot and the subsequent initialization of all the processes and services behind the scenes. But once we're actually at that point, open up a browser, navigate to the IP address that's been assigned to us via Azure, and connect. Ensure that it's an HTTPS connection. And there we have it, a verified CloudLens Manager installation. Fairly simple. So once we're here, let's manage it. Let's configure the taps and the management, and let's have them start talking and sending data. So using the default credentials as supplied within the deployment guide, we'll use those to log in. And it will ask us to change the admin password. So we're in the dashboard. We can see what's happening with all the services behind the scenes, the resources that are being consumed, and some of the basic configuration around the deployment itself. From here, we won't be deploying or configuring the taps. We have to do that via a different user, which we'll create in a moment. What I'm just doing here is logging out, because I've changed the admin password. I just want to ensure that I can log back in again using those same credentials. And it looks like we had success. As I mentioned, you get to see all the information around the resource of the CloudLens Manager deployment. So you can see whether you've appropriately sized the box or not. Some of the other options you have, now we won't see much here in terms of identity sources because we have nothing configured at all. But other options are obviously in terms of licensing, user management. Now this is where we'll configure another administrator, in which I'll just use myself, to which then we can configure and deploy the taps, configure them, and then manage the communication between the taps and the manager. Okay, user created. Further configuration options would be to, if you wish to have the communication between the taps and the manager encrypted, you can import a TLS certificate, but you'd have to find a method of deploying that certificate to all of the other workstations as well. If you wish to update the manager, download a new file or installer and upload it here. So I've just logged out of the standard admin and I'll log in as myself as a newly created user. And we'll start the process again. So agreeing to the license, changing that to a new password. And then what it will do is open up a wizard to which we could then either use a wizard or manually configure. Now I'll show you basically kind of both versions, but I prefer to use the manual. But using the wizard, it basically, you can see here, it gives you the configuration of the various options you have. So for Linux or Windows, the configurations you require. Now, Keysight CloudLens has the concept of projects. So a tap or a node can only belong to a single project, but you can have multiple projects. So different CloudLens managers are deployed in different geographical locations, so on and so forth. So there are various options there, but some of the important information is right here. So that's if you wish to use the wizard. Now in this case, just to show you exactly what is happening in the background and how actually it all works, we'll go through the process of configuring it manually. But say the wizard here, you just go through the basic steps, follow those steps, and it explains. So, and here we go. So we're going to do this manually. We'll create a new project and we'll give that project a name. Very simply. And there we have it. Click inside that project and we have these three options. The top right there's the new project. So we'll need to take a copy of that because we'll need that to configure the tabs later on. But it's always there for reference. And here we go. So this is basically a separate VM. These are Windows workstations. Now deployed the executable and you just have the various details. So it already had a previous project assigned. So we just copy and paste the new one and the server IP or host. If you wish to give it a tag, can be used to reference later for configuration. You can also do it at this point also. In this case, I think I'll remove the tag. And we'll save that configuration. Once you save the configuration, you'll need to either start or restart the CloudLens service on the workstation. And there you go. Now we have 2 workstations, so just bring that across and we'll do exactly the same thing on the second workstation. There are methods for mass deployments. So I guess in the Windows environment, you probably use group policies. And I think there's scripts that can be provided by Keysight for Linux distributions. Sort of help with sort of large deployments. Okay, so now we have 2 workstations. So now what we need to do basically is let's set this all up. So I'm working kind of backwards here. So let's look at setting up the destination. So the destination is the sensors. So we're going to put the IP address. And now in this particular case, I was playing around and I'm using the IP address of the sensor itself, not the load balancer in front of it. So we have a destination. Now let's the source group. Now you'll notice there already we have the nodes already presented themselves in the manager. Every 2 minutes they will effectively phone home. Now if they fail to phone home or miss the heartbeats for 6 minutes, then an alert can be raised within the CloudLens manager just to let you know that this particular node or nodes are missing or gone absent, and so you can just investigate. Now we'll just set up a group involving those two nodes, and now we're going to set up another group which will just have in it the Vectra sensor. Now, there's two ways of doing that. We can either go via the tap ID or the tag name. Tag name is far easier. Save it as a tool, give it a name, probably Vectra sensor. Leave the aggregate interface as its default, and we'll click OK. So now we have source and destination. How do we get them to talk to each other now? Well, simply select the source and drag to the destination. Now, how do we want them to actually communicate? Well, we want all IP traffic. We want bidirectional. We want raw traffic. Okay, VXLAN. And for the VNI, any number greater than 0. So 1 will suffice. Click OK. And there we have it, a working deployment CloudLens manager within Azure. As soon as the communication actually starts, that line between the two source and destinations will actually get thicker depending on how much traffic is being consumed. So a great little tool, visual tool there for completely easily see what's happening. So, thank you for listening.